Right, so we've had Renegades at this point. I've actually enjoyed a lot of the content we've had this time around. We'll discuss it a little bit. I didn't really want to get into a review of Renegades itself specifically, but we'll talk about that and the state of the game as it stands right now. Yes, the conversation about player counts will come up. I know some folks hate that. We won't blow it out of proportion though. Obviously, it does have a bearing on the future of the game. We'll also discuss what Bungie have said recently, as they have kind of recognized some of the bigger issues they've created in Year of Prophecy. And there's a connection between that and where we go from here, as well as the conversation about 2026 content. We still have expansion content on the roadmap, although there is conversation about a potential delay for whatever comes next. So I guess a bit of a general where we're at with the game, with the inclusion of what Bungie have said on that subject as well. If you guys enjoyed the video, be sure to give us your thoughts in the comment section. Let's also try not to rip each other's heads off if we have differing opinions. That's kind of one of the worst things about the current state of the game and the community, is the division it creates between players who like the game right now and those who are less than satisfied and would maybe come back under the right circumstances, right? Just keep in mind it is a video game after all. And let's get into it. Initially, my thoughts on Renegades. I'm not going to talk about story stuff too much. I did enjoy the campaign, especially the actual bespoke parts of it, the missions. And it kind of got better as it went along, right? There was that bit early on where it felt like a seasonal story talking to a lot of vendors, which did deliver narrative, but was a bit jarring in terms of gameplay. Otherwise, Renegades overall is very polished, right? Production value overall is a significant step up from Edge of Fate. And I know not everyone will agree, but for me, Lawless Frontier is one of the best game modes Bungie have ever actually produced. Of course, any of us would eventually get bored playing it, but in terms of the combat, the ad density, the map design, and the aesthetic, as well as inclusions like the Renegades abilities, in quotations, I've never been a fan of Bungie referring to gameplay mechanics, in activities as abilities, but if there was ever a time where it's fair enough, I'd say Renegades is probably just about there. Also, vehicle combat, really good. So in a lot of ways, Renegades and the pursuits, including the exotic mission, the Praxic Blade and the hunt for the crystals, all that kind of stuff. It's a really good bundle of content. And that's despite my concerns that throwing Star Wars and Destiny together in such a blatant way might feel a bit cheesy. I know that triggered folks when I said it a couple of weeks back, but that's not me saying I don't enjoy it. I think Renegades is really solid, and one of the things that doing the collaboration has kind of, I wouldn't say enabled, but inspired Bungie to do, is to think about that aesthetic component, as well as the gameplay mechanics, and it's just brought something that feels a little bit different to Destiny. There's the conversation about player counts though. Off the top of my head, I'm not going to go into very specific numbers, but the Steam charts when Edge of Fate came out were around 100,000 players, something like that. And for Renegades, it was down to around 70,000 players. So there's been a further drop after the Year of Prophecy began. Steam charts don't speak for all platforms, but there's a general trend that we can see there, which is probably replicated across all of the platforms. And it's not surprising that there were fewer players when Renegades dropped, because so many players got burnt out or exhausted by the Edge of Fate era, the power grind, and a lot of back and forth between Bungie and the community in trying to actually improve how that feels. I also appreciate a lot of people don't like the feel of the portal, which absolutely takes something away from the sense of Destiny being this large solar system with loads of stuff to explore. And that's one of the things I actually like about Renegades, right? When you're dealing with Tharsis Outpost, all of the game modes, the holo map, the portal just fades away into the background and the game feels so much better. Not applying modifiers, clicking on cubes, and again actually feeling like it's a world and not just a menu. Now, I think the player numbers we're seeing right now, for the moment, are going to be the new reality for Destiny. And of course, they will drop further again, because in a month's time, Renegades definitely won't be new, right? So it's kind of inevitable that the downward trend will continue. And whether that's a big concern for Bungie or not is kind of hard to guess at, right? I imagine it must be to an extent, but we should also remember Bungie to some degree must have anticipated this happening as we went into Year of Prophecy. And of course, they're spending less resources on Destiny now. We get less content overall. And so it's hard to say at which point does this become a really big issue where maybe it's hard to actually support Destiny. That isn't entirely clear, and people will make that comparison to player numbers being lower than the Curse of Osiris era, but we should remember that that was a very different time where Bungie also had additional studios working on Destiny, and I think over 1,000 developers that were basically only there for producing Destiny content. So what was a big problem then may not be as big of a problem now, because the scale of things has totally changed. Bungie have promised next year we will get a roadmap for the future of Destiny. Also important because we didn't really hear from the game director for a long time, but Tyson Green finally made some comments in interviews before Renegades. Robbie Stevens spoke to Roguesite and said, "A big part of this year was people wanting change and asking us to make changes to the game with new things to do and things to explore, as well as loot and different ways of even playing the game. But change is messy, and the thing that we will own and acknowledge is that there are probably parts of the game where we went too far and changed too much too quickly, and with that comes attacks." And he's basically speaking about the amount of bugs and going back to that drawing board that Bungie have had to do to make adjustments to these systems, essentially saying that they've bit off more than they can chew. And we see that, right? Whether it was adjusting the power climb, trying to make changes to the portal, changing how gear tiering worked, even small adjustments. Because Bungie are working with a smaller team, they were having to spend more time than anticipated going back and fixing things from the Edge of Fate era, as opposed to working on new content. And I guess that's kind of the tax that he's talking about. So that is one of the first big mistakes, arguably, and they all kind of feed into each other, right? Bungie wanted to do the portal, but the problem was that they needed to make the gear exciting, so they introduced gear tiers. But in introducing gear tiers, they applied a new set of responsibilities to all new gear and existing things in the game, which is why so many things have essentially been soft sunset, because in this system it was really hard for Bungie to be like, well, we'll apply tiers to everything that's ever existed, and then players can additionally go and hunt whatever, Witch Queen weapons again, but with tiers this time. That was something that was really difficult to do, so because of some of the choices that Bungie had made, they were slowly kind of painting themselves into a corner where it was really difficult to maneuver and also resource heavy. Tyson Green, more specifically, said, coming out of the Final Shape era, they had this big downward spike in player numbers, and part of that was because they'd ended the Light and Dark saga. And so they kind of took, in a way, a wild swing at changing the game in a way that also made it easier to continue to develop, but created more engagement and reasons for players to continue playing the same content, right? And that's where the gear tiers, power progression, and even challenge customization comes into the mix. And Tyson Green flat out said, this did not work. I think we've been taught a bunch of very hard lessons about what players want, and there are two kinds of live games, those that listen to players and those that don't, and we don't want to be a dead live game. We want to keep building destiny. He also recognized players are telling us they don't want to chase a simple number that goes up, and instead players want real rewards. The important thing about this commentary is that it identifies that Bungie are very aware of the kind of problems they've created with this new system, which is a good thing, right? If Bungie aren't aware, if they don't understand the problem at its core, it's very difficult to do something that actually improves on it. I don't imagine that Renegades had a lot of time to actually respond to bigger pieces of feedback about the portal, for instance, or indeed gear tiering. One of the things that Bungie did do is scrap their plans to reset power. They also scrapped the new gear system that they'd introduced with Edge of Fate. And I'm very glad that they did those things because, as Tyson Green said himself, chasing a number that goes up isn't necessarily fun. At the same time, it leaves us in a weird place where Bungie have introduced this tiering system, when we look at rewards in particular, but most of us came into Edge of Fate earning tier 4 gear and are now earning tier 5 gear just a week later. So on top of all the other systems that Bungie have introduced, this also throws into question the tiering system overall, right? Because while Armor 3.0 is great, and while getting tier 5 weapons is also awesome, it's kind of weird in a world where anything below those tiers is irrelevant and we just don't want them. So do we need tiers? I actually asked that question before Edge of Fate even dropped. Personally, I saw a lot of these issues kind of coming down the road, and I still think it will always feel bad when we go back to earning tier 2 or tier 3 in the future, so I don't really know what Bungie do about that. And all of these components form part of the question, where do Bungie go from here? This year, we are aware that we should be getting more expansion content. Bungie originally had said that we'd see the Shattered Cycle expansion in summer of 2026 and then the Alchemist expansion in winter of 2026. For those to really have a chance to succeed, obviously, those expansions need to do big and exciting things. For instance, new subclasses would be great at some point. That's one of the things we always talk about not seeing in Year of Prophecy style content. Obviously, there are loads of other components to that. It needs to be a good expansion. It needs to have loads of good gear. So making a very good expansion is one part of the equation. The other part is coming up with a satisfying solution to the problems that the portal introduced, creating new and more interesting systems that replace the number goes up power grind, right? And Bungie have to do that in tandem with whatever else they want to produce in terms of expansion content. A leak recently suggested that the next expansion may actually be internally delayed. This came from Colony Deeks, who's been a pretty reliable leaker in terms of Destiny content. So there may be some substance to it, but even if we look at it logically, it does seem possible that, it might be 2 months or 6 months, who knows? What I'm saying is it is not wild to speculate at the possibility of some kind of delay, as of course Bungie were planning on making expansion content content at this point and not having to revise very big systems in Destiny like the portal or the gear tiering or power system, which is now back on the menu, right? Because if Bungie don't change those things, any future content will struggle to some capacity. And while Renegades is very good, looking at player numbers, part of that equation is the fact that the core of Destiny has not changed significantly from back in Edge of Fate, and they were the main things that kind of drove players away from the game. So it is a valid question. Where do we go from here? Bungie have helped to identify the problems, or at least they've identified to us that they understand the problems that we have with the game, which is the main thing, right? And it's true that we will still have to wait for this roadmap that Bungie have outlined, which I sincerely hope will be dropping by the spring of 2026. Hopefully it won't be much longer than that. I also hope that Bungie outline the expansion and content plans at the earliest point that is actually reasonable when we get into next year, right? If we're not going to get an expansion in, say, July, currently the Guardian rank listing in the game runs up until July 21st, if I'm not mistaken, 2026. So that is a possible date for an expansion, although it is not really reliable info in terms of a potential release date. It's just an indication, and in the past, those season timers have sometimes been right, sometimes they haven't. And so the simple reality for us at the moment is it's still going to be a wait and see kind of situation, probably for the next half a year. At best, we might get that roadmap at some point by the end of the winter or perhaps spring. And if we're lucky, it will have, significant enough changes in there that hype us up for the next expansion, which also is going to have to be a juicer. If Bungie can continue to work on the level that they have with Renegades though, and actually expand from there, maybe do even better than that, then in terms of big content drops themselves, that is promising, in my opinion. But I'd love to get your thoughts in the comments section, guys. That's really all we can discuss today. Let me know, how do you feel about Renegades? How do you feel about the future of the game? And what kind of core changes would you love to see to the portal, leveling systems, gear, and all of that kind of stuff? I don't think the portal is going to go away, but I do think it could be combined with the rest of Destiny 2 in a better way, in a kind of global sense. Obviously, there are lots of moving parts inside of that, but I'd say it all still has the potential to be something very good. And Renegades, as well as small additions like Vanguard alerts, do feel like steps in the right direction. And I'll finish with this. Ultimately, like I said, there are still a lot of question marks regarding the future of Destiny, where Bungie go, how it goes, how long it goes for, and so you'll just have to give me your thoughts below. Those are my thoughts on where we're at as we get close to ending the year. Give me yours below. If you've enjoyed the conversation, a rating very much helps us out. But for the moment, I appreciate you tuning in, and I hope you have an awesome day.